Hey everyone, welcome to our second video about the animal kingdom. This time we'll be covering some more of the different groups of the animal kingdom, like different phyla, and we will go all the way through fish in this video. So as we go, the animals that you will see get more complex. First thing I have for you today in this video is mollusks. Mollusks include clams, slugs, and octopi. And you can see some different examples there. All of these organisms are considered mollusks. Snails, clams, squid, slugs, octopus, those are all mollusks. Mollusks have bilateral symmetry, so you could divide them in two. It's a complex form of symmetry. They can get their nutrients in many different ways, ranging from herbivores, carnivores, filter feeders, detritivores, and parasites. For respiration, for getting oxygen, most of them have gills in their mantle if they're underwater marine organism. Or if they're land animals like snails and slugs, they have moist skin to diffuse oxygen into their body. Their circulatory systems can vary. Some have open circulatory systems, like our snails and our slugs and clams, but others have closed circulatory systems, like octopi and squid. So it just kind of depends within the mollusk. For excretion, they have an organ called a nephridia, and that nephridia is kind of like our kidneys, and it helps them remove ammonia, which they can release into the area around them, the water around them. Their nervous systems are kind of complex. They have a simple nerve cord, so they are, in fact, chordates, and some of them even have brains. Movement, they are motile. These mollusks can either use their foot, like this is considered the foot of the snail, the foot of the clam, and the snail is kind of its own foot, but they're kind of called pseudopods. And or if they are water organisms like the octopus or the squid, they have a siphon which they can use to propel themselves through the waters. For excretion, for reproduction, it's mostly sexual reproduction, so they do need to find a mate. An example is a vampire squid. You can see the scientific name there too. And an extinct version of mollusk, or an extinct part of the mollusk group, is called the nautilus, and that's just kind of an interesting fact. Next up, we have arthropods, and arthropods include insects, arachnids, and crustaceans. So a lot of our what you would call bugs, but insects, arachnids, millipedes, centipedes, scorpions, also crustaceans like lobsters and crabs and shrimp. Those are all arthropods. And arthropods have bilateral body symmetry, and they do have an exoskeleton. So that's an interesting development among the arthropods. They get their nutrients many different ways. Some are herbivores, some are carnivores, omnivores, and parasites. They have what's called trachea tubes or book lungs or feather-like gills if they're underwater. So they have basically simplified lungs. Book lungs are simplified lungs, and feather-like gills are just simplified gills for the ones that are underwater, like the crab and the shrimp. Those are different ways to do respiration than what we've seen before. So before, we've seen organisms that still do some diffusion for their respiration, and these ones have actually more complex respiratory systems. All of the arthropods do have an open circulatory system, which is a little less complex. For excretion, they do have certain organs for that. They're called Malpighian tubules, and they're basically like little simple kidneys. For a response or nervous system, they do have cephalization. They all have brains, eyes, taste receptors, pretty complex nervous system. They are all pretty motile and have pretty well-developed muscle groups to help them move. And most of them do reproduce sexually. Some do internal reproduction, which means that they carry their young inside and then essentially give birth to them, and some of it is external fertilization. So an example is the Atlantic horseshoe crab, and some interesting facts are that some arthropods have complex social systems. So like bees and ants that live in a colony, they actually have complex social systems, so they are in communication with each other. Next up, we have echinoderms. Those include starfish, sea urchins, and even sea cucumbers. That's a sea cucumber. They're kind of funny looking. These guys are kind of an interesting group. They are placed at this level of complexity because of the way that they develop, but they do have radial symmetry, which is a little bit less complex than bilateral symmetry. They get nutrients in many different ways. Some of them do filter feeding, some are detritivores, and some are carnivores. Most of them have skin gills where they can exchange gas, which are very simple. Circulation, moving the oxygen around their bodies, is done by a water vascular system. So they don't have blood. They just have water that flows through their bodies and brings oxygen throughout their bodies. They don't have a real heart either. They have waste that leaves their body through their tube feet through diffusion, but it's specifically through the tube feet. They don't have cephalization. They don't have heads or brains or eyes, but they can detect some light and gravity. Most of them are motile, using tube feet and muscles within their bodies. And most of them are sexual reproducers, but they do external fertilization, which means that they just release their sperm and egg into the water and hope that it meets up with some other sperm and egg. An example is the sunflower sea star. Scientific name is there. And some sea stars can be cannibalistic, which means some sea stars eat other sea stars. Kind of interesting. All right, here we have non-vertebrate chordates and jawless fish. This is tunicates, lancelets, and this is a hagfish, and down here is a lamprey. So these guys have bilateral symmetry for at least one stage of their life. For tunicates, they're filter feeders, and other types of jawless fish are parasites or detritivores, meaning they usually eat like dead things if they're detritivores. They do respiration through having gills or gill slits, which is pretty complex here. Open circulatory system, and sometimes a semi-closed circulatory system, but not fully closed. They do excrete waste through water through their gills. They have cephalization for at least one stage of life, and they have simple nervous systems. Tunicates are sessile, while the rest are motile and able to swim. All of them are sexual reproduction, doing sexual reproduction, and an example is the Pacific hagfish. And hagfish are actually covered in slime to protect against predators. So this guy's covered in slime, and it can protect against predators because if a predator tries to grab it, it's slimy and it can move away. Over here, we have our cartilaginous fish, like sharks and skates and rays, and you might be a little familiar with them. They have bilateral symmetry. Most are carnivores, but some, like the whale shark, are filter feeders. They do respiration through gills, and they have a closed circulatory system. They use gills and kidneys for excretion, so that's the first time we're actually seeing kidneys. These cartilaginous fish do have cephalization and a well-developed brain with many senses, especially thinking about sharks. They have very complex senses, even potentially able to detect electrical fields in the water. They are motile. They can swim. Some of them have a swim bladder to help them float. They reproduce sexually, and some have eggs that hatch within the mother and then give live birth, and others hatch outside of the mother. An example is the basking shark. And for a fun fact, cartilage is a flexible tissue that also makes your nose and ears, but it makes up the skeletal system of these cartilaginous fish. And last on this video is bony fish. These are all different types of bony fish. Some are marine, some are freshwater. This is like a perch that you might have seen at Smith Mountain Lake, and a catfish. Bony fish have bilateral symmetry. They can be all different types of heterotrophs. They can be herbivores, carnivores, parasites, or detritivores. They do respiration through their gills, and they have a closed circulatory system to move oxygen around their bodies. They excrete through their kidneys, and then that leaves out of their body through their gills. Most of them have brains and cephalization with many senses, just like the sharks and rays have many senses, so do fish. They are motile, and they can swim. Again, some have a swim bladder to help them float. They reproduce sexually. And an example is a largemouth bass. And fun fact, most freshwater fish are bony fish. There are not many cartilaginous freshwater fish. Thanks so much for listening.